First of all, let me thank all of you for participating today. This will not be our first one, so if questions arise after today, do not feel that they will not be addressed. I just would like to start it off like we do in most of our things, is begin with a prayer. It's Ignatius's prayer for generosity. Lord, teach us to be generous. Teach us to serve you as you deserve, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labor and not to ask for any reward, to that of knowing that I do your will. Amen. First of all, I wanted to say thank you to all of you who are current parents, who have been through really the first phase of what we have gone through in terms of finishing up the school year. I want to compliment our administration, our faculty and staff especially, for their flexibility, but also for our families, because you have made it much easier in terms of how you have cooperated with us. But what our task is today is really to address your questions that you have as we look forward to summer school and also the beginning of the school year. We will do our best to be transparent, to answer the questions as best we can. Obviously, there are many unknowns, and what we say today could shift tomorrow because of something that we hear later today. We have been very blessed with a very strong medical team that is here to advise us, and also for the internal reopening committee that is really helping to advise Greg, especially in terms of what direction we need to go in. But the medical task force really is a godsend really to help us know that what we are doing is for the safety of not just our students, but also for our faculty and staff, and also for visitors. So that is certainly the mindset that we are entering into our planning and discussions. So I would now just like to turn it over to Greg.
Thanks, Father Bill, and welcome everyone. Just want to say thank you for taking the time to be with us today, or for viewing this if you're viewing it later recorded. I am mindful that we're finishing up the school year and starting off the summer, and that feels a lot different than it usually does in terms of the opportunities that are there and not there for you and your kids over the summer. And just want to thank everybody for everything that we've been through together over these past 2 months. Those of you who are returning students, it's been a memorable time to say the least, one that I think that we'll be able to look back at, and we'll have some memories about for sure. And I can say that I will feel a sense of pride in what we as a community were able to do together over the last 2 months. While there's rockiness and challenges to it, I'm just so appreciative of how our community responded, just echoing Father Bill's words there, towards our students and parents, in addition to our faculty and staff. So thank you all for all that we've been doing. And like Father Bill said, this is the first of what we expect to be a series of updates through the summer on our reopening efforts and plans, and taking questions. And I really appreciate we got 27 questions in advance of this, that I'll have a chance to go through a number of those. And then we have the opportunity to ask live questions while we're here too. So you can see on the functions of Zoom, there's a Q&A bubble there. You can type those in at any time. I will begin by speaking from a few slides for probably no more than 10 minutes, and then go to some of those pre-sent questions from the sheet there, and some of those will be answered through the presentation as well. And then after that, I'll get to the Q&A, the live Q&A that comes in on the Zoom function. And Father Bill and I will just kind of answer those as they come in as best we can. We'll finish by 12 o'clock at the latest. If we're done with questions, we'll finish before then, just whatever is needed. But like I said, this will not be the last of these, and whatever we don't get to today, or whatever we just can't answer today, expect to have this opportunity again down the road. So for what I wanted to start with, this is just an image of what Father Bill just talked about with the expertise that we have that is helping us, huge collaborative team effort here by the school. We have a campus reopening task force working of staff. That's an internal task force of staff from around the building in different areas that's working on all sorts of details, following closely the guidance that's coming from CDC, from the state of Indiana, from Marion County, from all sorts of places. And as that comes in, going through a lot of different issues from around the building of the ability to safely reopen from now until school starts. So that includes things like procedures for screening coming into the building, supplies that we need for cleaning and disinfecting, hygiene approaches, all sorts of things that as a food service, transportation on buses, everything you can think of the questions that are coming up, we're addressing on that task force, just kind of one at a time and with the guidance. The medical task force is a great group of doctors and scientists that are advising us and has been super helpful. And then our academic leadership team, which is called the Academic Department Chairs Group, includes principal's office as well as academic leaders from around the school, is really working on learning platforms. And those groups are kind of our key team planning groups that are working on all this. One of the questions I'll address in the course of this presentation that came in that was a great question said that will advice from your medical task force, will you take that as superseding CDC or Marion County Health Department or other? And the answer is no. The primary, it's not there's no question or choice involved in whether we follow local official guidance or CDC guidance or anything like that. That's the primary guiding place for us. So we'll always follow those instructions. And then within whatever flexibility we have, then there'll still be a lot of choices to be made of how we operate. So that's how we're taking that. I want to give you a sense of some key dates in the next couple of months on our reopening timeline. Starting June starts next week, and through the month of June, we're still closed to students and visitors. And we are, so you all know, slowly phasing in reopening of more offices to faculty and staff for necessary functions. There's still a guidance is that anything that can be done from home at this time should still be done from home, and we're following that. We've also seen, if you've seen the governor's back on track guidelines, June 15th is a date that offices can be fully open. And so we're basically taking the June opportunity to phase in a reopening of the building just for faculty and staff and beginning some procedures that we'll use for everybody just with the groups that are in June. Summer session 1 that happens in June, as you probably all know, is fully online. And so all of our teachers of summer session 1, and we've had we still have a lot of students taking those online courses. We even had more students opt into them. I think a lot of people were looking for activities over the summer, and this is something that can be done in June, right? So the summer session 1 is strong, and I think those teachers are going to be ready to offer a great experience online from start to finish. Beginning on June 8th is the first day of summer session 1. And so if your kids are involved in that, you've already heard some details about how that's going to work. July 1st, the IHSAA the governor has said at this point, or the state of Indiana has said that can be the first day that school athletics can be prepared to open. So that's a big day for us there to be prepared to have our first workouts and practices. I'll speak more to the specifics about that in a minute. But that is the first day that we expect to have students back in the building, is that July 1st. I think it's a Wednesday. And then July 6th, the Monday after that, summer session 2 is still planned to be in person. The summer session 2 is largely PE, and PE is going to be largely, if not exclusively, outside if weather allows. And backup plans on the inside will be safely distanced. And then there are some in-class courses, in-classroom classes that are happening in summer session 2. And the positive on this is that we have the opportunity, we're working with at that point 10 to 20% maybe of our usual building capacity of students, plenty of room to spread around. We'll have plenty of procedures in place that everybody who's involved in summer session 2 will hear about with at least a couple of weeks notice in advance of how everything will work for building procedures. And so that'll give us what we've heard in terms of the advice is that it'll be good for places to have the opportunity to phase things in on a smaller level before opening up to more and more students. And I think our numbers on summer session 2 are going to give us the opportunity to do just that. The week of August 3rd is our freshman study skills workshop. Several dozen freshmen, a good chunk of our freshmen end up doing this opportunity to come in for a few hours with their academic counselors to get themselves prepared to get a great start for the year. And we'll still plan on, again, having that session happening. Again, we'll be able to spread out. We'll have several weeks of experience with in-building students in the building, and we'll have the things ready to go for that. The new student orientation still planned for August 12th. That's all incoming freshmen as well as transfer students. And then the first day of school is Thursday, August 13th. So those are just some key dates ahead of us. And you just know that whenever we have, one of the reasons for laying this timeline out is so that we know from a planning and communication standpoint that we're going to get lots of communication out to all families and students about what the procedures will be well in advance of the first time that they need to come into school. You can expect that at least, a few weeks ahead of time for each of those. So, it's not too long from now that people who are involved in athletics will be hearing more specifics on our athletic plan. But you should hear that by mid-June about how that's going to work. And the last slide I have is I want to share, and this will be part of the way that I answer a number of the questions that came in before the session. I want to share some of the key principles of how a safe reopening can happen, we believe. These are kind of guiding principles that really guide us to a number of different specific logistical decisions. And again, that I think answer a lot of the questions and concerns that are out there, at least in a preliminary way. So the first thing we need to do to ensure that we can reopen, to ensure that schools everywhere can reopen, is to make sure that nobody comes into school sick. It is, common, I think, just, life before COVID was that, students and teachers would often feel like, I don't want to miss a day of school, even if I'm not feeling great. I might get behind on an assignment, I might miss class, miss a test, I have to make it up. And so our academic team is really planning for, for academic procedures that if students are missing school, they need to be missing school, that they will not fall behind, that we'll have much more robust systems than we usually do for students to be able to continue the learning from home, to stay parallel with the class, even when they're not in school. There needs to be no incentive for a student to come into school sick. And that goes for faculty and staff as well. So we need to have a lot of things in place to enable people to be able to still participate from home in every way possible. There were a couple questions in the preliminary questions that came in about if students would be able to opt out if they just don't feel comfortable, if families don't feel comfortable having their students come into the building. If the building is open and in-person classes are happening, would they be able to participate from home? And the answer is yes. We're preparing a system that will allow that to happen, because whether you need to be out for a couple of days or whether you need to be out for 2 weeks to ensure that you're quarantined for 2 weeks, whether you need to just not start on August 13th in person but still want to be a part of the class, we want to be able to make that possible for everybody in a way that, again, takes away any incentive for anybody to feel like they need to come into school sick to put themselves or their families or others at higher risk in this time. So I think that that guiding principle, really a lot of things flow from that in our plan of how classes will be set up, how attendance policies will be set up, how sick leave policies will be set up for faculty and staff. There's a lot of things to be determined there, but that guiding principle helps us, I think, to stay true to that. The number one CDC recommendation is stay home if you're sick. And that needs to be a mantra throughout the coming months and school year. Number two, implement social distancing measures at school, which will require significant program adjustments. Again, a lot of things flow from this. So when we're in school, we're going to have a lot of different procedures that are going to reduce and minimize the risk as much as possible. You all have been living through this as well as I have, and out in the community as things start to slowly reopen, and have kind of seen and felt the reality of it. That, as we come back to being in social settings, as we come back to stores, to restaurants, to all sorts of things like that, it's a matter of, it's not a matter of zero risk, it's a matter of managing and mitigating the risk and trying to keep it as low as possible. So that's how we're approaching it in school as well. There's a big question in our minds that has not been determined of what is the safe capacity of our building in this situation. And everything is still on the table, I think, at this point. It's certainly still on the table, and we don't know, and it's out of our control, that state officials, that others might give schools guidance that limit us in that regard, that say this is what your maximum capacity can be based on your size or something like that. And then, of course, we would follow that. We might have the flexibility to decide for ourselves. And so, again, in that case, one of the questions came in about, you've talked about kind of half and half. A lot of schools are talking about this, maybe you'd stagger attendance so that half the kids come on some days and half of them come on other days. And then when you're not in the building, you're following along from home. that's an option that's being discussed and explored in a preliminary way by a lot of schools. And that's on the table, but also coming back with open to everybody is still on the table as well. We're going through the procedures right now in that campus reopening task force of trying to determine what the capacities are of our classrooms, what the safe capacity is for our library, for all the different gathering spaces are in the school. Certainly situations around the school where many people would gather together are going to need to be minimized and shifted and canceled and that kind of thing. So I can not give you a lot of specific concrete plans at this point about how that's going to work. Although I can say that there is going to be a lot of things considered, that we will consider it as we come back to school. We are implementing social distancing measures as well as hygiene and other measures that will also require there to be, it's going to make a difference to curriculum. It's going to make a difference to how students go about their day. It may change our schedule. You know, at this time, if we have everybody back in the building, we're still planning on implementing the new schedule we created last year. But if conditions change, or if we can't have everybody back in the building, we'll probably have to come up with a whole different schedule. So again, all those things around the table, but social distancing at school is a reality that we're planning for and making a lot of procedures for. Education and training of all of us in the community. We're going to just try to be really directive with students in the building, directive with training our faculty and staff over the summer about how procedures are going to need to work. I think everybody's going to need to know not just what to do, but why we're doing it. What's the purpose of this, and in what ways are, you know, when we take it back to kind of our community values, in what ways are these social distancing measures, these things are kind of a pain for all of us. In what ways are they caring for each other? I think that is the reality, and that's how we're going to approach it with people. So I'd expect a lot of information coming from us. I expect students to be regularly educated about how this works. Certainly personal hygiene, the emphasis on this is going to be huge, as well as facilities and equipment around the building for people and how to use it. And so you can expect a lot on that. And then number 4, being prepared for someone in the community to test positive. Again, the reality is, and it's still tough to wrap our brains around a little bit, I think, is that as we come back to things in society in general, you know, we are going to be closely watching the numbers on virus cases, on transmission, on all those things. But the reality is that there's going to be the risk of further spread of the virus when people are back in person together. So as a school, if we're coming back to in-person school, that means that we need to be proactively prepared for what happens when, as one example, somebody in the middle of the day comes down with a cough or a symptom, another symptom of COVID-19. What do we do in that situation? How do we help them? How do we protect the rest of the community and all that? What happens when we get our first report of somebody's family member or a student themselves or a faculty staff member who is tested positive? What are our school procedures, our communication, and all of our safety measures to be taken at that point? So we'll be proactively prepared for all that on the first day that students come back in the building on July 1st, and you should hear procedures and expectations of how we'll handle those situations, again, well in advance. But that is a reality that we will need to be prepared for and will be prepared for, to care for people in the community, including those who may get sick, those whose family members may get sick, as well as everybody who's around them in the safest ways possible. And I want to add to this also includes just taking care of the mental health of our students in our community. There's a lot of attention and thought being paid to, as we've already had a mental health toll, I think, on everybody, including our students, of the last 2 months, and can continue to expect to see that going forward. So we've got great resources and professionals in our school and values around this, and you can expect to see a lot of things in place for caring for our students in terms of their mental health and our whole community when we come back as well. So that's my summary of, I think, principles that will guide us. And at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go to, I've got a list. I organized the questions that came in on the preliminary form into several categories. And I'm going to be able to answer a number of these. And then I'll start going into those Q&A Zoom bubbles. So if you've got questions, again, feel free to put those in there at any time. Just find the right window for myself here. Okay. really appreciate it. I want to say a number of really thoughtful questions and questions that that hit a range of different things that we are considering, and some things that I've already spoken to as well. So here is my first categories of questions. I have questions around the staying home issue. And this is sort of, I guess, examples of what I was talking about before. So one question was, if campus reopens for the fall, if families are not comfortable sending their student, will there be an e-learning option for that student? Again, the answer is yes. So any student who is at home, whether that's from day one or needs to stay home, will have a parallel learning option where they're able to stay enrolled in the classes they're enrolled in, to keep up with those classes, to keep the work and the learning going. And even if the class is happening in person in the building, the student from home should still be able to participate as fully as absolutely possible. That is the plan. Number two, what if a student gets sick and has to miss some weeks of school? At what point would a student have to repeat a class? Is there always a way to catch up? Again, speaking to this notion that there should always be a way for them to keep up, and we hope to be able to extend that to them as long as they need to stay home. We would, of course, stay in touch with students and families about how that's going and learning from home. The teacher would be closely in touch with those families and students. And if it becomes a point where that's challenging, it doesn't feel like it's going well, we will certainly adapt and adjust as we go and get that and get our systems in as best shape as we can make them for, like I said, the parallel kind of setup where learning is happening in school and learning is also happening at home in the same classes. Next question, will a school have a nurse on campus as part of staff if classes resume for the fall? We've definitely discussed this. I don't know if that's a yes or no at this point, but what I can say is we will definitely have somebody on staff who is trained in specific procedures on taking care of people in the building who are sick. And I'm getting advice from my medical task force about what the qualifications of that person need to be. Certainly a school nurse would meet those qualifications. As most of you know, we don't currently have a school nurse on staff, but it is a consideration for us. And again, if we don't end up having a school nurse on staff, we'll have somebody on staff identified, at least one person, probably more, who are trained in specific procedures, who are able to handle any kind of eventuality that happens with a student in the building or anybody in the building who's sick, or other procedures in that way. Next, will students be required to wear masks, and will there be any penalties for not doing so? It's a little too early to know that yet, but at this point I can tell you I do anticipate for our in-building classes in July, it's fairly likely that everybody's going to need to be in a mask throughout the time that they're in the building still in July. With that being a month away, I can't say that 100% yet. But in terms of setting our building policies in June, we are asking our faculty and staff who come into the building in June to be wearing masks in the building. We believe that's best practice in all the guidance that we've heard. And I do expect that that'll likely be the case when students come in July. So that'll give us experience with that. And then will that still be necessary in August? If it is, then that's what we'll do. So I believe that's fairly likely. I think everybody's getting more and more used to having masks when they go out in public. We'll have education for students and families around specifics around masks, about the proper use of them, types of masks, about the washing of them. There's all sorts of guidance around this that we will share out when we send out our mask policies, and we'll need people to follow those. Will plexiglass be installed in the school? Next question. We have definitely discussed that too. We have identified several areas where we think it'll be best to have those plexiglass shields, such as at the front desk for people coming in is one likely area. And so we're identifying areas in the school where that might be necessary, and preparing in terms of our facility for that to happen where it needs to happen. Next question, that's kind of in the same category. These are all kind of, how we're setting up things in that social distancing in school kind of category. You mentioned possibly having a split campus where half the students would be on campus and half would be online certain days. Is that still the plan if campus reopens? You don't expect to reopen at full capacity, do you? I think I already addressed this in my previous remarks. It is on the table to do half and half. It is on the table to be at full capacity. We really will judge that as conditions become clear through the summer. So the split, a little bit more about that split campus idea. Again, a lot of schools are talking about this. Schools will talk about having kind of A days and B days, where half the students come to school on one day and half the students come to school on the other day, which just shrinks your capacity, allows you to spread out more, allows you to have more room in between students, allows you to organize the building or more in common areas as well as in classrooms. So that might be what we end up doing, and what that would mean, again, we go back to that parallel learning idea, that students who are coming into the building are getting the in-person class and instruction and discussions on those days, and students who are not coming into the building on a given day are still learning from home, keeping up with that class. Ideally, they'd be able to, to screen into the class from home live. That's what we're working on, is the technology capability to be able to do that where necessary. So those are all, there's a lot of ideas around about how to reduce the capacity in class, how to stagger attendance so that, but while still maintaining the learning for all students in a way that splits it between home and school. And that is definitely a possibility. If campus reopens on time, what will extracurricular activities and athletics look like? So this will become clear, I think, when we have our athletics plan and experience with it in July. I can tell you a little bit of insight into what that looks like now. A lot of you I know are dealing with this already with sports leagues that are opening earlier than schools are. But what's happening, what we're planning for is for there to, you phase in athletic practices with certainly non-contact drills first, conditioning, things where students are, in a group doing things where they're not coming into contact with each other, but there are things that are conditioning themselves or working on skills on an individual level. And then when conditions say that it's safe to do so, then you move towards the more like scrimmage and contact type situations. We think that's possible at some level with every sport in terms of doing the individual conditioning and types of workouts that are safe. What's safe on July 1st and what's safe and people feel comfortable with when the school year starts could be different. And I think July will give us a good amount of experience with that. Good news, is a lot of flexibility in July with our teams. We don't have, games and contests, happening in July that we need to have everybody be in, questioning whether those will be able to happen. The bigger question is whether those will be able to happen in August once they are scheduled. Will the first football game be able to happen, and all that kind of thing. I don't know the answer to any of those questions yet, but I can tell you we're certainly approaching athletics, I guess in a similar way, in some ways that we're approaching campus, is that, we're going to have to adapt all of our activities for the new reality, for safety, for risk mitigation. And that includes athletics, and it includes academics, and includes extracurriculars too. I can tell you something, and this gets one of the other questions. One of the biggest tricks is around some of the performance-based kind of activities like choir, theater, and things like that. Those seem like they're going to be really tricky in this environment. Specifically about singing. There's some of you might have seen or heard about studies around a couple instances of choirs where it can be a lot of spread from that kind of thing, of viruses. So I think that's going to be really tricky and touchy. But again, I would put it this way, that we have our great arts faculty and staff who are ready to give students a great learning experience with those activities in ways that are safe. So if that means that the choir is not singing together, but individual students are able to do individual musical things with guidance from our faculty, that's how we'll adapt those classes. So the question that came in like that, will you consider live streaming orchestra concerts or recording them for immune compromised family members? Would you consider some outdoor mass gatherings instead of indoor? So I think that question hits on two different things that I think are interesting and significant. One is, will we be live streaming things? The answer is yes. We're actually building new capability for ourselves, purchasing some new equipment and all that for on the occasion of our July 19th graduation to live stream that event. And that opportunity to be ready for that will give us the capability and experience to be able to live stream more and more things that are spectator type things, whether it's sports or performances that are able to happen or things like that for anybody who wants to attend but who can't attend, whether it's because of capacity issues or because we can't have fans there or guests there, or because they don't feel comfortable coming in because they're immune compromised or any of those kind of things. So we'll have a lot of streaming, I think, of things more so than we have in the past. And then would you consider some outdoor gatherings instead of indoor? Definitely, we're going to use our whole campus facility as much as possible, more than usual, as weather allows. It's unfortunate that we're not further south for this situation, that we can't be outdoors like some schools and other places, but we can be outdoors certainly in August and September a lot. And I do expect that we'll do more things outdoors, whether it could involve classes or other gatherings, more so than usual, because there's such an advantage in terms of risk minimization of virus transmission outdoors compared to indoors. Another question on the adjustments category: will the school calendar be adjusted for no fall break, consistent with university calendars, to discourage people from traveling and keep everyone safe and healthy? That's a great question. We have not made any plans like that yet, but again, on the table, I would definitely consider adjusting the school calendar for those kinds of issues. I know a lot of universities are already making those plans to end earlier, start earlier, end earlier, cancel breaks, things like that. Again, we have not made any changes like that. We still plan to begin on August 13th is the current plan, and to end the same day we would have otherwise in the semester. And we still have our breaks on the calendar as they usually would be. But I wouldn't say those are set in stone in the sense that, I mean, you know, there's a lot of things that are shifting at this time, and that's something on the table to consider. I'm going to go to a few more questions that are in a different category. I put these in the category of the being prepared for somebody to be sick. So one question: in the inevitable case of a Brebeuf student's family member contracting COVID and needing to quarantine, will there be accommodations made for him or her to learn remotely? The answer is yes. And I think we all should be prepared for that. And we'll give specific guidance to people on when they shouldn't come to school, whether it's their own symptoms or if it's a family member testing positive or all sorts of things like that. We'll have a lot of specifics in that regard. And that allows me to speak a little more to something I haven't talked about a lot yet, which is the issue of screening, which is a really important part of our procedures that we'll be putting into place real soon for our faculty and staff, and will be in place for students coming in. When we say we don't want people to come into school sick, we want to have a very specific procedure for people to kind of do a self-assessment is the term that's used of that before you come into school each day. And then to report to us, the way to report to us if you have any symptoms, if you have to be staying home and how long you're going to be home or how long you continue to be home and for what reason. I think we'll have a much more robust system for doing that remotely, probably via an app. We're looking at building an app right now that will be a self-screening process that goes through a list of questions. You know, do you have any of these symptoms? If you do not come into school and follow these CDC instructions on what you should do given those symptoms you've described, and then come into school when you have done X, Y, and Z. So you'll get specific instructions on that if that is the case through this screening process. We expect to have that in place for all students coming into the building before we allow anybody to come into the building, because beyond just saying don't come into school sick, we want to have a robust guidance and tracking procedure for people who are getting sick and needing to let us know that, and letting them know when it's safe for them to come back to school. And of course, working around HIPAA requirements and those privacy issues and all that, that will be very sensitive to all that too. But I think that collecting, tracking, guiding, giving direction on this is going to be the right thing to do for everybody, both for your individual safety and for the safety of everybody who you're coming into contact with in this situation. That speaks to, I kind of already got into the next question I was going to read, which is how will Brebeuf monitor the health of the community? What if there are positive cases? How will the community be notified? And so we will have a plan for that. And again, we will communicate that in advance. I don't know the specifics of it yet, but that is one thing that I'm sure that we're going to need to do, is that to let everybody know about the kind of current building conditions and in terms of the health and safety of everything. We're going to all need to be prepared to close the building temporarily in cases that we need to clean and sanitize if that's what's necessary. It's hard to tell right now whether that's, you know, how often and what conditions that would be necessary in August, you know, compared to right now. So we will have plans in place for all those things, and we will be very transparent with the community about how those things are going, again, while staying within appropriate privacy for everybody involved. A few more, and then I'll get to the Q&A, the Zoom Q&A. One, is there a formal online learning plan as a plan B for the fall that's been expanded from what was used last year? And then a similar question was, will there be an online learning plan if necessary that involves more live instruction than what we did at the end of this semester? So the answer is yes, we are reviewing, and we will have a plan in place for if we need to be fully online, what that would look like. I would expect there to be some similarities for sure of what we did this past month and a half, in particular since spring break. But we are always looking to improve that. And I think that if we knew that we were going to be online from day one and for an extended period of time, we would definitely build in, you know, as much live instruction as possible. Probably more opportunities than we had in the AB or the maroon and gold setup that we had for this past couple months. Although I don't know exactly what that would look like. I think the priority, if that's the case, is that, you know, you still want to have an online course that gives all students a sense of connectedness, of live help and teaching and service to them in all ways. And so we'd be looking at tweaking and improving our online processes from what they have been recently, to get better and better at it as we go in the fall. I can tell you our faculty and staff are doing a lot of professional development and training on that over the summer. There's big things going on in that regard for faculty to kind of tool up, skill up on online learning skills. And so while I think we've been in pretty good shape on that, we can always get better, and that's what we're going to be doing going into the fall for if and when it's necessary. I think that, yeah, okay, so what I've seen, I think I've covered all the ones that I wanted to make sure I covered going into this, because I combined some of them together. I see a few more have come in through this Google form while we've been here. I'm going to turn now to the Q&A bubble format that is on the Zoom function and see if I can use this for a little bit to keep going on these questions. And then maybe I'll go back to the Google form if necessary. But if you put in a question while we've been going on that Google form, that's not the list I'm looking at now, but I hope I can have time to get back to it. Question number 1 on here is summer school PE canceled? No, in July, summer school PE is still planned to happen. So if you're registered for summer school PE in July, session 2, you're still registered for that, and it's still planned to happen beginning on July 6th. You'll receive more information on that by mid-June about how that'll look in terms of procedures. We will be almost all outside if we can do it. So that's still happening. Let's see, this question has already been answered. This is the changing the calendar around breaks. How can parents volunteer for the Health Council? Thanks for asking. If you're interested in lending us expertise, just email Father Bill or me anytime, and we'd love for help, so thank you. Will there be a more lenient make-up work policy so that students don't come to school sick? Yes, for sure. I don't know exactly what it'll look like yet, but that is keeping in with that principle of there can be no incentive for students to come to school sick. Will the slide deck video be available or sent out post-presentation? Yes, this entire thing is being recorded and will be available to everybody afterwards. Would a student still be allowed to sign up for a first session summer school course? The answer is yes. We do have some limited capacity at this point, but depending on the course, please contact Amy Pitcher, apitcher@brebeuf.org. Pitcher as in a pitcher of water. And she is in charge of summer school registration. She can help you. If we have capacity, we'd love to have people add. Will there be any special considerations made for freshmen versus other grades out of consideration that their social needs are distinct? This is a great question. We've definitely been thinking about this, especially if we had to be online, how do you welcome and orient and bring people into your community if they're not there physically? We're thinking about that a lot. And it's really one of the reasons that, we are putting up a priority on trying to safely come back together is I think for new students coming into the community in particular, there's going to be ways to do that safely in all the ways that I've just described in ways that are best done in person for sure. So we always make a special, give special thoughtfulness to incoming students and getting them into the community. We put a lot of effort and work into that. We'll continue to do that with these new circumstances in mind, whether that be through activities, through summer school. It's one of the reasons we moved all summer school PE to the second session. We wanted them to have that in-person PE summer school experience, which is great for so many of them, rather than an online PE option in June, which we thought would be inferior for the purposes that we were talking about in this question. So that's definitely something we'll be thinking about. This one, I was a little late to the call. Did you say sports won't start up until July as opposed to June? That's correct. Directive from the Indiana Department of Education has been that schools need to be closed to students through June 30th. And so then the IHSA followed up and clarified that all IHSA school sports activities can begin no earlier than July 1st. So that's our timeline as well. Question about masks, which I've already answered. Here's a good question. I'm not going to have a specific grade answer, but if the school needs to be at half capacity, will you try to separate based on grade level to help with social and emotional needs. This is one of those logistical questions that a lot of school leaders are talking about right now. If you had to do this, what's the best way to do it? Is it, it's going to be most convenient for families if siblings are there on the same day is one thing to think about. How do you organize it around classes? Students are in a high school setting are mixed up around their classes so much that it's impossible to make it so that, it's organized by a class in terms of like a classroom, all being there on the same day. Because students have 7 or so different classes. But there are a lot of different ways to organize this. We also, when you think about the grade level issue, we could make that a priority with some core curriculum like English, social studies, religious studies. Those are typically pretty strictly by grade level, although even that's not 100%. But there's a lot of classes, including math, world language, arts, that are mixed grade level. So it's impossible to do that in a clean, simple way, but we'll definitely be taking that into consideration when we make that plan of the best way to do it. Do masks include for summer PE? I will know that for sure by June 15th, but I don't know yet. Right now, I think what we're understanding, the way I understand it, is that, again, outdoors creates much less risk for virus transmission. So my thought right now, at least in draft form, is that if they're outside and keeping distance apart from each other outside, that masks will not be necessary for those activities. But I will say that could change by the time our guidance comes out, our rules come out on June 15th. And I'm going to take into account the advice of the experts and make our policy based on that. Sports question that was already answered, I think. This gets again to the AB days or the staggered or the half and half question. Are we planning to create a schedule where students rotate? That is what I've been addressing. And then the phrase that I want to speak to this specific example. For example, Monday, Wednesday, Friday are in-school learning, Tuesday, Thursday are e-learning. The way you have to think about it is if it's half and half, if that's what it is, it's the simplest way to do it. Then do you have it where students come every other day? Or do you have it where students come for 1 week and then are learning from home for the next week and so on? And then alternate? Or do you do it 3 days on, 3 days off? Those are all options that are all on the table if we were to go to that kind of system. Great question. I have not spoke to what will lunch look like for students once school reopens. So far, all the guidance that we're getting and what we're actively planning for July, for any student who, our options for July are that either students will need to bring their own lunch in a bag if they're staying through the day and they need to eat lunch in between 2 classes in the morning and afternoon, or we'd provide the opportunity for them to get boxed lunches that would be served to them outside. So we will not be, and that's what schools at this point are anticipating the guidance, unless things change a lot between now and August, which could happen, is that what everybody is saying is that cafeterias should not be serving from serving lines as usual, certainly not self-serve, sharing of utensils and things like that from one kid to the next at the salad bar. So I think lunch is going to have to look, lunch service, food service is going to have to look quite a bit different. And we're working with all that. There was a big webinar that several of our people attended on that last week. That's part of our campus reopening task force. Is food service is a big part of it. So I can't say what it'll look like yet, but if I had to guess, I would say that we might offer, we'd have reduced capacity in the cafeteria. Students would not go through the line. They may grab a box that's on a stack or something like that, or be encouraged to bring their own, or a combination of those things. But I would anticipate not being a traditional cafeteria line style service once school reopens. Have you heard anything about what other schools are planning in terms of athletics? Our ability will be impacted by what other teams will be doing. Great question. So we have been meeting among our conference. That's just one example of a collaborative group here that I didn't mention. The Circle City Conference that Brebeuf is a part of, the group of principals and athletic directors met 2 weeks ago, and we're meeting again next week to collaborate around this question of how we're opening in athletics. Of course, the IHSAA will be giving guidance on all sorts of activities as we get closer to actual sports events happening. So we do have some good collaborative groups for that. And yeah, you're absolutely right that, it might come up that, some schools are ready to go with, doing a contest and some schools aren't. And so things have to be canceled for that reason. Don't know what to predict exactly in that, but we'll see how it goes. And we do have good collaborative groups happening that are talking about all that. Not that anybody's saying we need to do it in lockstep, but sharing best practices and coordinating as much as possible. Let's see. We've addressed some of these.
So human service renewal grant, they did talk about.
I'm going to answer this in a general way to avoid getting too far down the privacy road. Have any faculty, staff, or students contract the virus that you are aware of, and how has the school been able to support them? The answer is yes, which is not surprising here in Marion County, right? So we have basically done everything that we can to support them, certainly from an attendance perspective, as we've all been online. It's been, you know, the students in that situation or families in that situation have been able to have all the leeway in the world with being able to work through that. Is there any assistance needed in supporting families question is, you know, at this current time, we feel like we've been able we've been blessed to be able to offer families help in what's been asked for. We've set up a couple systems for that, you know, forms or, you know, click here to let us know about a need that you have, and those outreach phone calls that we've made to everybody. So I feel really good about how our communities come together around helping each other and supporting each other in this time. And again, that has included a couple situations of people in the community, family, that have contracted the virus that have been positive. And I think that we all need to be prepared as a community that is, you know, a likelihood without a vaccine in place, that is a likelihood of things to continue to happen down the road. So how do we support each other? How do we protect each other and ourselves in the best way possible? I feel like our community is, you know, we're figuring this out as well as everybody else, but we also have, you know, a great foundation in place of care for each other. People who are committed to that, and the expertise and systems required to do it really well.
Greg, can I add to that? First of all, again, if somebody listening, or if you know somebody that really is in need of more assistance and we are aware of, please let us know, even if it's anonymously, because we do want to be able to reach out more proactively. And if you yourself really feels there's some way that you would like to be of help, that in case we need it, if you could either contact myself or Jamie Elkins, so that we can have you on a list. So if we need to call on you, we will. So thank you for
that. Thanks, Father Bill. Another question that came in: how will Brebeuf look to incorporate religious and spiritual growth for the students? Great question. So I can tell you that our campus ministry, community service staff, religious studies teachers are actively talking about that. And, you know, one way that it happens naturally still is through religious studies classes. Another big way it happens at Brebeuf is retreats. And retreats are obviously going to look different in the coming fall. And I can't tell you what that's going to look like yet. But you know, it's unlikely that students would be staying someplace overnight in a dorm room type setting, right? Certainly not in September. So I think our challenge is to make sure that we still provide those opportunities for students. We're definitely intentionally and thoughtfully thinking about that beyond just the religious studies class, but also you know, opportunities for students to opt into, such as retreats and other things like that. We will definitely be thoughtful about that. Same with, you know, school-wide prayer, prayer services, assemblies, masses. You know, for instance, a big thing on the calendar, beginning of the year celebration called the Mass of the Holy Spirit. You know, I don't anticipate that we're going to have 1,000 people in the gym on August 20th or whatever that event was originally planned to be. So the way we're thinking about it is, okay, how can we provide that same kind of or a similar kind of offering, a similar kind of community welcome back to school celebration that's done in a safe way. And so we're planning for that, thinking about that, and we will have something in place to make it happen. We're not going to drop those things for sure. As clear a part of our program as academics. Let's see. How will testing be done when classes are remote? Great question. We are looking into different systems for doing this. We're testing out in summer school, as well as teachers have been getting experience with this over the last 2 months. We don't have a single system that we'll tap into yet, and I'm not sure if we will. I can tell you the way teachers think about this is, you know, one, it probably changes the types of assessments that they do in many cases. But there's also ways to do in some types of traditional testing in ways that are remote. So we're working on that question along with schools everywhere, and we're getting better and better at it with experience. It is a tricky one. June 13th ACT. I don't know exactly what the channels are where people hear about this. We have definitely canceled the June 13th ACT. I'm sorry if you haven't heard about that yet, if you're registered. We are still planning on having the July ACT. I believe it's July 18th. So as of now, that one's still on. So anyway, I don't know. I don't know what the system by which you're supposed to get that information or why you haven't if you're registered, but we are not having the June 13th ACT, but we are planning the July ACT at this time. I would also say, just a bigger picture on that, we're definitely aware of college counseling leadership on how how this challenges students on SAT and ACT. We've had all these canceled tests this spring and the summer. And for those rising seniors in particular, might be feeling behind at this point on SAT, ACT. So we're being real intentional about that, trying to work to make sure that need is supported by our students. Colleges are very aware of that, and you've probably heard all the news coming out about more and more colleges treating that differently in the coming admissions cycle. So that's going to be a really interesting puzzle, I would say. And I just want you all to know that our college counseling team is really well equipped and prepared to support all those needs as the options become available. What will Learning Center and electives look like? Great question. So Learning Center, like everything else, is going to need to be adapted for our safe capacity, and for usually in the Learning Center, kids are right next to each other at the table working on something with their teacher there. So we're looking at spacing options in the Learning Center. We're looking at scheduling of it. We're looking at all sorts of options. Also, if we're in this kind of not in school all the time mode, how that's done remotely. Learning from our experience of the last 2 months to do it better and better. So just more to come on what that looks like for Learning Center students. We've got 7 minutes. Let's see. Understandably, many unanswered questions. Yes, I'm sure you're feeling that yourselves and hearing that in the way I'm answering a number of these things. So apologize for the amount of uncertainty that's still out there, but I hope you understand. When do you anticipate we'll have another webinar with more detailed information? I definitely want to do one before the end of June, when we have full guidance about July. So what I would think is, in probably the latter half of June, that we do another one of these, if not before. I mean, if something changes in terms of conditions that we need to reach out and do this again, we'll do it before then. But at the latest, I'd say by the latter half of June, to be able to talk more about our procedures for on-campus in July, we'll be a lot clearer on some of these answers, certainly for July by then, and probably even for August. Let's see. This is a specific question, but I know a number of people are in this boat. Is the junior community service class for the summer still on track to happen? So complicated answer. We've had, that's dependent on our community service partners, our placements, the agencies where our students are placed for their community service experiences. We've had a limited number of them available for June, and so we've had to have the June session only available to rising seniors who are the greatest need priority in terms of getting that in their schedules. So anybody who's in that boat's already received that communication, but we had to basically cut the capacity of the June community service class. And to be clear, the community service is happening out of the agency and the coursework is happening online. But for July, as of right now, everybody who's registered for July community service is still registered for July community service. We're gonna do the best we can to be able to offer that class to as many of those registrants as possible, maybe even all of them, but it really is dependent on our placement agencies and their capacity. So Nick Klingler, our community service director and teacher, will be in contact with all those July summer school community service people as we get closer and as we have more clarity around that. I'd say it's a little up in the air at this point is the best I can say about that one. Let's see, here's another. Is there any thought to surveying the students about what they need as they approach the new school year? Yes, and there was a student leadership question that I wanted to address too. So as I think everybody who has been with us already has seen how over our e-learning time, we tried to do a couple of kind of quick feedback surveys early on to take the pulse of how things were going. And then we did phone calls to everybody to learn from that too. We really like to get feedback to understand the needs of our community. And I would expect that students, as we get closer, to hear more feedback. This Q&A gives us some feedback, but I'd like to gather it in more organized ways too, especially after we put out plans and procedures, to hear your feedback on that. So I definitely would expect to be getting some more survey emails from me over the summer before school starts, both for parents and students. And then the student leadership issue, and that is really, I've had a couple students reach out after that video came out that we did last week about planning to reopen, saying, "That's great, how can I help? I'm excited to be back." So, we really have taken advantage of, really just tapped into the students' desire to be leaders, both when we were learning remotely and as we come back in this situation, through our student government and other ways, but we're always interested in students just coming forward with interest in help also. So we'll definitely be utilizing that through a lot of our normal channels as well as additional ones. Okay, I've got 4 minutes. I'm going to scan through and see if there's anything that I definitely haven't addressed that I want to make sure I get to today, just through these other, there's been some questions that have come in on chat. And now I'm going to look back at the additional questions that have come in over Google. I feel like the chat ones, I think maybe they got kind of copied and pasted into the Q&A, because I think I addressed most or all of those. Let me go back to this, these additional Google questions. All right, I've got to answer this one. Somebody asked, will there still be a candy bowl next year? I think that's a joke, right? I love the question though. Everybody loves the candy bowl. Students will be very sad. I'm glad I can find some humor still in this. I can't imagine there being a safe candy bowl adaptation. Okay, serious question though. If there's a second wave and the school does not close down, how will the school handle transitions between classes? The stairs are oftentimes very crowded and very far from social distancing. That is a big consideration about school capacity. Transitions between classes, stairwells, big gathering spaces. A lot of schools are talking about one-way hallways, one-way stairwells, about managing that in terms of the campus and training students on how to do that. We'll definitely incorporate that into our plans. And then a couple of questions about this second wave issue. And I didn't mention it, but I should, that, as we go through our timeline, all that timeline is, expected things. Everything I'm saying now is expected in some ways. If, the trends on virus transmission, on numbers in Marion County and the community, continue as they currently are. Of course, everybody in the medical world is also talking about this, what if we get, once things start to reopen, a second wave, an increase of transmission, increase of cases, and so on. And we will continue to work with that medical task force to really closely track those numbers. And I know that all the public officials will be doing the same. And, just know that, we're not making these plans or timelines with, we're barreling through no matter what the community, numbers or conditions are. All those things will affect our plan, and we'll be prepared to adapt and to change midstream. And I'm just anticipating that that'll need to happen. We can make all the plans we want right now, but it'll certainly be dependent on, it'll probably be changed by what's happening in the broader community, as well as within our Brebeuf community. Okay, that takes us to about our time. Father Bill, you want to say any last kind of closings?
Just thank you, Greg, for your articulation and all the work that you and your team have put together. Thanks to all who participated today, and we do look forward to the next Q&A. And if there's anything that you really need, would like an answer to, please do not hesitate to contact us.
God bless you all. Thanks for your time today. I hope to see you real soon.
Thank you. Thank you.